Forbidden Rite ended up one of the most popular builds of the current league. This is because it combines striking visuals with powerful mechanics. After all, anytime you have multiple projectiles that can overlap in some way, you know there's going to be a way to break the build. On top of this, it was completely new. It was the perfect storm of a skill, and the success of Forbidden Rite totem builds have more than earned that reputation. It is arguably the strongest boss killing skill within the league right now. But I'm not playing totems. And before I get into the rest of the video, I wanted to say, yes, if you want the best possible Forbidden Rite build or the best possible boss killing build, I do think it's Forbidden Rite totems. I'm not playing them because I didn't want to play another totem build after having started my league as Toxic Rain Ballista Raider. That is just a personal choice. I chose to play something unoptimal. If you're wondering, well, why didn't I play life-based? The answer to that is, I did, and it felt clunky and inefficient as I had to fight so hard against the self-damage, and you can only overkill things so hard before it feels really pointless. At the beginning of the league, when I had theory-crafted Forbidden Rite, I got a lot of stuff wrong. The two things that I did get right, however, were that number one, it was really strong with totems, and this ended up being the case. And number two, that it's totally fine to play it as CI. The skill has enough ways to scale damage that you don't need the max possible DPS in your build. You can go with a fairly tanky defensive setup, and it'll do plenty of damage. So, in today's video, I'm going to talk about the choices I made, the mechanics involved, and how it all turned out. This video was brought to you in part due to the generous support of my YouTube channel members and patrons. More about how you can support at the end of the video. But if you want to help for free, you can do so by feeding the algorithm gods and leaving a like on the video, or turning on bell notifications so that you see whenever I upload. So let's start with the why CI part. When I first made my video, Theory Crafting Forbidden Rite, as I said before, I got a lot of things wrong. But one thing in the comments stood out to me. People saying it was impossible or wrong to play it as CI. They were looking at it from a damage perspective. Oh, well, of course you go life-based. Of course you go hybrid. They weren't looking at it from the fact that if you do that, even if you're life-based with 90% chaos res, you have to mitigate over 1,000 self-damage a second, which with enough on-hit effects, enough cast when damage taken loops, you can do. But it certainly makes you squishier, and it certainly taxes your survivability to the point where your best bet really is to put on a headhunter for extra safety. And I didn't want to do that. Instead, I wanted to make something that felt tanky and felt safe from the beginning, and then I could, with further investment, scale the damage up, which is why I chose CI. CI offers a really easy framework for defensive scaling, with block, ES on block, along with ES Leech and ES Regen all located in the top of the tree. Unfortunately, I didn't get stun immunity from my tree. I tried it for a bit, but then I noticed when I had Brine King, I wasn't really noticing stuns anyway, probably because between Brine King and the chance to avoid being stunned I had in other places, it felt surprisingly okay, so I just rolled with it. Malediction is something that I would really love to work into the build, and for bossing, it is best to switch to Malediction, dropping Profane Bloom, but Profane Bloom is so amazing unclear that I had to include it. Let's be honest, if you're playing an Occultist and you don't have Profane Bloom, you're probably a sociopath. So what are some of the other itemized mechanics that I used and didn't use, starting with why am I not using 2 Void Batteries and Badge of Brotherhood? Well, first of all, it makes you really squishy. Having a shield lets you scale block, and having a shield gives you a ton of ES, which also scales your damage and in part makes up for the Void Battery you drop. On top of this, dropping Badge was one of the best decisions I made with the build. You'll notice that very few people on Hardcore use Badge of Brotherhood. This is because while the damage is very good in PoB, and it's very good while mapping, it's incredibly inconsistent while bossing, where your frenzy charges aren't as easy to maintain, especially on a fight like Cirrus with a lot of invulnerability phases. It also made my mana a bit of a mess to the point where I really had to use a mana flask. So I switched the Void Battery out for a shield, I switched to a Badge out for Inner Conviction, and I then fixed my mana through a very complicated process of experimentation. The budget version is run a mana flask. You can also use an Enlightened 3 and Replica Conqueror's Efficiency and Higher Clarity by taking some extra reduced mana reservation nodes on the tree over near Influence. What I ended up going with instead, though, was using my Militant Faith to reduce the cost a lot, running Clarity, running Enlightened 4 so I had the mana for the Clarity, and using a reduced cost of Skills Jewel to round out all of my mana costs. It's not quite perfect. There's a few occasions where if my casting damage taken triggers and I try to cast Forbidden Rite, I might not have quite enough mana, but overall it feels good and mana is no longer a problem. Again, just run an Enduring Flask if you run into too many issues here. Also as a note, I'm using a fairly expensive helmet and I'm anointing Tranquility. If you want to save some money with this build, you can use Arcane Guarding instead and use a Crown of the Inward Eye. Which gets me into my next point. I prefer using a +1 Forbidden Rite base as opposed to the Forbidden Rite projectile speed. With Forbidden Rite projectile speed, I have 2 base projectiles and 4 more from Greater Volley, with 1 tending to miss on single target. On the other hand, I can get a decent bit of projectile speed from Streamlined and a 2120 Forbidden Rite. On top of this, the +1 from a helmet gives me 3 base, 2 more from Volley, for 5 total, all of which should hit on a single target. If you have absolutely no projectile speed at all, it will feel bad, and you should see my video in the description for more on this. Now, at several points I've mentioned I have defenses, but what are they? Well, first of all, with Tempest Shield up, 75-60 block. Or with my roomies, it goes to 75-72. If something does manage to hit me, or damage me significantly because I do have Glancing Blows, then it triggers a Frost Shield, which is a great amount of extra HP, along with a little crit, Immortal Call, which will be relatively effective given that I always have 3 endurance charges, which I'm generating via Enduring Composure, because Forbidden Rite hits me, and I have a video talking about that as well, and why I'm using Anomalous Arctic Armor. I've got some Elusive for a little more avoidance. I'm putting Consecrated Ground and Chill in my Arcanist brand for single target. I have Leech from the Tree, and I have an ES gain on hit, Watcher's Eye, which means this character is very tanky, which makes it pretty safe for bossing, delving, and mapping. If you make a mistake, yes, you can die, but you really have to make mistakes before you're likely to get killed. I do use a few uniques here, and I did buy a few of the items in my build, like the boots, chest piece, rings, amulet, and cluster jewels. This was because they just happened to be relatively inexpensive compared to the difficulty or cost associated with rolling them. On the other hand, I did craft a lot of my gear as well, such as a belt and shield. I rolled the base items with dense fossils until I got the prefixes that I wanted, then I used prefixes cannot be changed, plus Harvest Reforged Defense to hit the ES on block on the shield and the ES recovery rate on the belt. The helmet was a bit of a pain, since I'm putting a prefix with no tags with a suffix that's fairly annoying to roll. So it's kind of just Aorb and Prey. What I ended up doing is making a bunch of helmets, selling several of them, and buying the one with the int that I wanted, since int is another way to scale ES without having better ES rolls on the item. You could also purpose craft it by getting the perfect prefixes on a Warlord Hunter base, then doing prefixes cannot be changed, Reforged Chaos until you got the -9, but that's a much more arduous, intensive, and long process that I didn't really feel was necessary. And then for the gloves, I started with an ES base, again rolled with dense fossils, and this time finished using a Veiled Chaos with prefixes cannot be changed until I hit the crit chance chaos damage if you've crit recently craft. You should hit this within a few attempts from my experience. So what have I used this build for? I've kind of thrown it at a little bit of everything. I've used it to zoom around Delve a lot, as I didn't feel I gave Delving a proper attempt since it was reworked last League. I had gone down, I had done some stuff, but I hadn't pushed it as far as I wanted. Overall, the build works really well in Delve, especially since it has on-hit mechanics, so if you're hitting invulnerable mobs in darkness, you can still keep yourself alive very effectively. I also did quite a few maps, including Delirium up to 40%. I never really pushed Delirium, and you probably do want a Headhunter, just for smoothness if you're going up to 100% on this build, but it never felt bad at any given point, including when I fought Kosis or Omniphobia. I've also done several bosses, including Maven and Cirrus. The Cirrus was very smooth. I found that the defenses were fine, and even when I spent a bit of extra time just running around to see when I got hit by die beams and stuff how it felt easy. I never felt like Cirrus was going to really kill me, and I'm sure on Maven it would be the same, although I didn't take excess hits on Maven, just because I didn't want to be bothered with that and I kind of hate the fight. So my overall thoughts are, if you want the best possible Forbidden Rite build, you should go Forbidden Rite Totems. But if you want something self-cast that's very fun, clears well, see Profane Bloom pops everywhere, does bossing, and can survive the mistakes you make, this is a good build. It feels like it's easily hardcore viable, although I haven't tried it on hardcore personally. It has layered defenses, and it has a lot of really interesting damage mechanics, so it was a lot of fun to put the gear together and scale the build. But what do you think? Is Forbidden Rite something that you are looking forward to playing? And have you already gotten your fill of it? Or are you going to be playing it next League if it isn't nerfed into the ground? I'd love to hear all of your Forbidden Rite thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. And again, a special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. If you want to support me, you can do so by clicking the links down in the description below or on screen right now. You can also support by making purchases through my Nexus page. Or if you just want to chill and hang out, be sure to join the Discord. Again, links for everything are down in the description below. Thank you, and have a great day.